3,050 meters. A blinding wall of beige sand erasing the horizon. 9 hostages, seconds away from execution. The elite operators of SEAL Team 6 were pinned down, out of options, and ordering a retreat. That's when the 4'9" sniper they called the Dog chambered around. The SciTac M200 intervention sniper rifle weighs 31 pounds empty. Abigail Trent weighed barely 95 pounds soaking wet. When she stood the weapon upright on its stock, the muzzle brake aligned perfectly with her collarbone. At 4 feet and 9 inches tall, she was a physical anomaly in the United States Navy and an absolute impossibility in the SEAL teams. Yet there she was wearing the Trident, sitting in the humid belly of a C-17 Globemaster bound for the scorching deserts of North Africa. The air in the cargo hold smelled of hydraulic fluid, stale sweat, and weapon oil. Across from Abigail sat the men of Alpha Squad. They were titans of muscle and bone, standing well over 6 feet, their bodies forged in the crushing crucible of BUDS and tempered by a dozen combat deployments. And then there was Abigail. With her pale porcelain features and impossibly small frame, she looked like a child playing dress-up in her older brother's tactical gear. Chief Petty Officer David Sterling didn't bother hiding his disdain. Sterling was a 20-year veteran with a scar that jagged across his jawline and a reputation for breaking men who didn't measure up. "I still don't get it," Sterling muttered, his voice a low gravel that cut through the drone of the aircraft engines. He didn't look at Abigail, but his words were meant for her. He was speaking to Petty Officer Second Class Jackson Hayes, the team's spotter. "Command is playing politics. This isn't a PR stunt. We're going into the devil's sandbox to hunt a ghost, and they send me a porcelain figure." Hayes, a quiet man from Wyoming who preferred the silence of a sniper hide to squad room banter, offered a non-committal shrug. "She passed the pipeline, Chief. Same as us. Same Lord PT, same surf torture. Sure, let it." "She didn't carry the boat on her head, Hayes, because her head couldn't reach the damn hull," Sterling shot back. He finally turned his gaze to Abigail, his eyes cold and hard. "This isn't a shooting range in Coronado, Trent. Out there, the math doesn't matter if your heart gives out. Out there, a doll can't fight." Abigail didn't flinch. She didn't offer a witty retort or defend her honor. She just methodically ran an oiled rag over the bolt of her Chaytak. She had heard it all before. Doll? Thumbelina. Liability. The insults were just noise. She knew what she was. She was a mathematician of death. While the men relied on brute strength, Abigail relied on physics, ballistics, and an almost supernatural intuition for atmospheric pressure. She understood the Coriolis effect, how the rotation of the Earth would literally move a target out of the path of a bullet over extreme distances, better than she understood normal human conversation. The briefing prior to takeoff had been grim. Their target was Victor Kale, a rogue Western mercenary turned arms broker. Kale was ruthless, paranoid, and heavily fortified. 2 days ago, Kale's militia had ambushed a convoy from a non-governmental organization, taking 9 doctors and engineers hostage. Intelligence placed them at an abandoned Soviet-era mining compound deep in the Badlands. Kale was threatening to execute 1 hostage every hour on live video until a massive ransom was paid. Command couldn't wait for diplomatic channels. Alpha Squad was tasked with a Halo high-altitude low-opening insertion, a grueling 10-mile foot patrol, and a simultaneous breach and elimination. "Trent, Hayes," Sterling barked as the red jump light illuminated the cargo hold, bathing the operators in a bloody glow. "You two are on overwatch. You find a perch on the canyon ridge. You do not engage unless the breach team is compromised or Kale tries to rabbit." "Understood." "Understood, Chief," Hayes said. Abigail simply nodded, racking the bolt of her rifle with a sharp, satisfying clack. 2 minutes, the loadmaster yelled. The cargo ramp began to lower, revealing a terrifying void of black night air. The temperature in the cabin plummeted instantly. Sterling checked his altimeter, then looked back at Abigail. "Try not to blow away, doll." Abigail stepped to the edge of the ramp, her heavy gear pulling at her shoulders, the 30-pound rifle strapped across her chest like an iron cross. She didn't look at Sterling. She just looked down into the abyss, calculated the wind shear, and stepped off the edge into the dark. The desert did not care about the trident on their chests. It was a hostile, indifferent furnace that punished every step. The insertion had gone perfectly, but the 10-mile trek through shifting dunes and jagged shale had taken a toll. For Abigail, every step required twice the effort of the men. Her stride was shorter, forcing her to nearly jog just to keep pace with Sterling's punishing march. By the time they reached the designated overwatch position, a jagged, unforgiving spine of rock overlooking the valley, her lungs burned and her legs felt like lead. But as soon as she went prone on the rock, the exhaustion evaporated. This was her domain, distanced her primary structure, Abigail whispered, her voice barely carrying over the dry wind. Beside her, Hayes peered through his high-powered spotting scope, a Kestrel wind meter held up to the breeze. I'm ranging the courtyard. You're looking at a staggering distance, Abby. 30,050 meters. Exactly 3,050. Abigail adjusted the turrets on her scope, her small, delicate fingers clicking the dials with surgical precision. 3,050 meters. Over 10,000 feet. Nearly 2 miles. It was a distance so absurdly long that the bullet would be in the air for over 6 seconds before it hit. At that range, she had to account for spin drift, aerodynamic jump, the barometric pressure, and the exact humidity of the air. Down in the valley, the compound looked like a tiny, rusted scar against the desert floor. Through her optics, she could see the heat mirage shimmering off the corrugated metal roofs, distorting the shapes of the armed guards patrolling the perimeter. "Breach team is in possession," Sterling's voice crackled over the encrypted radio net. He and the rest of Alpha Squad were huddled in a dry wash 200 meters from the compound's rear wall. "Stand by for breach on my mark." "Copy that, Alpha 1, Hayes replied. "Overwatch is set." Abigail slowed her breathing. She entered the zen-like state where the world narrowed down to the crosshairs of her scope. She watched as a heavy steel door in the courtyard opened. "Target spotted," she murmured. Victor Cale warped out into the blinding sunlight. He was a large man clad in desert tactical gear, smoking a cigar. Behind him, rough hands shoved the 9 hostages out into the dirt. They were bound, blindfolded, and kneeling in a row. "Chief," Hayes spoke into the radio, his voice tight. "Kyle is in the courtyard. He's got the hostages lined up. Looks like they're setting up a camera." "Damn it," Sterling swore over the comms. "He's moving the timeline up. Breach team, we go in 60 seconds. Trent, do you have a shot on Cale if this goes sideways?" "Now." Abigail looked through the scope. The wind was a gentle cross breeze, about 4 miles per hour. "Affirmative, Alpha 1. I have him." But the desert had other plans. "Hey, Abby," Hayes said, his voice suddenly dropping an octave. "Look at the horizon. North-northwest." Abigail shifted her left eye away from the optic and looked. A chill ran down her spine despite the 100-degree heat. A haboob. A massive apocalyptic wall of sand and dust stretching thousands of feet into the sky was rolling across the desert floor like a tidal wave of brown sludge. It was moving fast, swallowing the landscape in total darkness. "Alpha 1, this is Overwatch," Hayes said urgently. "Massive dust storm approaching from the north. It's going to hit the compound in less than 3 minutes. Up, Molly. Thumb off, where system from Öst Down in the dry wash, Sterling cursed loudly. "Command, this is Alpha 1. Do you have eyes on the weather pattern?" "Affirmative, Alpha 1, the cool voice of the Tactical Operations Center replied in their earpieces. "Satellite confirms a Category 3 haboob. Visibility will be reduced to absolute 0. Winds exceeding 60 miles per hour. Abort the breach. I repeat, abort the breach. Pull back to extraction point Bravo. Command, hostages are in the courtyard. He's going to execute them under the cover of the storm." Sterling yelled. "Negative, Alpha 1. It's a suicide mission if you breach in that soup. You won't be able to tell friend from foe. Abort. That is an order." Abigail watched through her scope. The leading edge of the storm hit the compound. The wind instantly whipped up, tearing at the tin roofs. Cale's men didn't run for cover. Instead, Cale drew his sidearm, laughing as the sand began to swirl around him. He was going to use the chaos to do the deed. "Chief," Abigail said over the radio, "I can take Kyle. Now." "Negative, Trent." "Negative," Sterling barked. "The wind is already hitting 40 knots down there. The dust is blinding. You can't make a 3,000-meter shot in a crosswind, Haboob. The bullet will be pushed 50 feet off target. Pack up your gear. We are falling back." "Chief, they're raising their weapons," Hayes reported, his voice cracking with panic as he looked through his scope. The visibility was dropping by the second, the compound becoming a hazy blur. "They're going to execute them all." "I said pack it up," Sterling roared. "A doll can't fight a damn hurricane." "Retreat." Abigail didn't move. She didn't pack up her rifle. She stared into the swirling vortex of brown sand that was rapidly erasing Victor Kyle and the 9 hostages from the face of the earth. "Hayes," Abigail said, her voice eerily calm. "Give me the wind velocity at the target, the midpoint, and the apex of the bullet's trajectory. Now." "Abby, you heard the chief. It's impossible, Jackson." She snapped, the sudden, terrifying authority in her small voice. "Give me the math." Hayes swallowed hard. He looked at his Kestrel. He looked at the boiling sky. Crosswinded target is 55 miles per hour left to right. Midpoint wind is shearing in the opposite direction, 20 miles per hour. Barometric pressure is plummeting. Visibility is... Abby, visibility is gone. I can't even see the compound anymore. It's just a wall of sand. I don't need to see them, Abigail whispered, closing her eyes for a fraction of a second, letting her brain build a 3-dimensional grid of the unseen world below. I knew exactly where they are. She opened her eyes, exhaled all the air from her lungs, and slid her finger over the trigger. "Abby, you are firing blind into a Category 3 Haboob." Petty Officer Second Class Jackson Hayes shouted, his voice barely audible over the roaring wind that was now tearing across their own ridgeline. Sand whipped against their tactical helmets like a barrage of birdshot. "Visibility is 0. You don't have a target." "Not. I thought." "And don't." "I have the math," Abigail Trent replied. Her voice was a chilling countermelody to the howling storm. It was entirely devoid of panic. Down in the valley, the compound was gone, swallowed by a churning ocean of brown earth. Chief David Sterling and the breach team were pinned in the dry wash, burying their faces in their shemas to breathe, effectively neutralized by the desert. Kale and his 8 mercenaries were in that courtyard with the 9 hostages, enveloped in the same blinding chaos. Abigail closed her eyes behind her optic. Her brain bypassed the visual input of the swirling sand and accessed the eidetic snapshot she had taken seconds before the storm hit. Hostage 1, Grid Alpha 7, kneeling. Hostile 1, Kale. Grid Alpha 8, standing 3 feet behind, slightly offset to the left. Hostiles 2 through 9, fanned out in a semicircle spaced roughly 4 feet apart. "Hayes," she commanded. "Density altitude." Hayes scrambled with his Kestrel, wiping grit from the digital display. "Density altitude is plummeting. Pour 200 feet and dropping. Temperature is 98 degrees. Humidity is 3%. Abigail dialed her elevation turret. The Shitak 408 caliber bullet weighed 419 grains. At 3,050 meters, the bullet would be in the air for 6.4 seconds. It would drop an agonizing 380 feet from the barrel to the target. She had to aim higher than the 30-story building just to hit the courtyard. "Wind," she demanded. "It's a blender out there," Hayes yelled, squinting through his spotting scope at nothing but brown swirling violently. "We have a 10-mile-per-hour headwind at the muzzle. Midway through the valley, the storm is creating a vortex cornet, a 25-mile-per-hour full-value crosswind from the right. At the target, God, Abby, at the target, the Haboob is pushing 45 miles per hour from the left. It's an S-curve wind shear." Abigail's fingers danced over the windage turret. She wasn't just guessing. She was calculating the aerodynamic jump, the spin drift of the bullet, rotating right, and the Coriolis effect. The Earth would literally rotate beneath the bullet during its 6-second flight, requiring her to aim 32 inches further to the east to account for the planet's movement. Hold left for the midway wind. Hold right for the terminal wind. Hold up for the drop. Hold east for the Earth. She exhaled. Her lungs emptied. Her heart rate, despite the adrenaline, dropped to 40 beats per minute. Between heartbeats, her tiny finger applied 3 pounds of pressure to the trigger. Crack. The massive 31-pound rifle kicked, sending a shockwave through Abigail's 95-pound frame, bruised collarbone, and into the rock beneath her. A massive tongue of fire erupted from the muzzle brake, instantly swallowed by the dust storm. "Shut out," she whispered. 1001, 1002, 1003. Down in the wash, Sterling gripped his radio. "Trent, you are firing blind. Ceasefire. You're going to hit the hostages. Outhet. Offer. 1004, 1005, 1006. Deep in the raging sandstorm, a wet, heavy thwack echoed faintly over the tactical comms left open by a microphone on one of the hostages. "Impact," Hayes whispered, staring in disbelief at the wall of sand. That Abigail was already moving. "Bolt," she muttered. She violently ripped the heavy steel bolt back, ejecting the brass casing, and slammed it forward, chambering a second round. "They won't hear the gunshot over the wind," Abigail said, speaking rapidly as she adjusted her aim an infinitesimal fraction of a millimeter. "But they will see Kyle drop. Panic response time for an untrained mercenary is roughly 2.5 seconds. In this low visibility, they will look down, then raise their weapons to execute the hostages in confusion. I have exactly 20 seconds to eliminate the remaining 8 targets before they squeeze their triggers. Abby, that's impossible. Wind update," she screamed. "Holding steady." Hayes barked back, fully caught in her gravitational pull of absolute focus. Midway vortex is shifting slightly, call it 20 miles per hour now. Abigail clicked her windage once. Crack. Target 2. The man standing to Cale's right. Flight time 6.4 seconds. She didn't wait to hear the impact. She slammed the bolt. Crack. Target 3. Slammed the bolt. Crack. Target 4. The barrel of the Chitak M200 began to smoke, the heat shimmering even through the drying sand. Her shoulder throbbed with a dull, agonizing ache. Every recoil was like being kicked by a mule, but her body was locked into a rigid mechanical rhythm. Crack. Target 5. Crack. Target 6. "Chief," Hayes yelled into the radio. She's engaging all targets. She's killing the hostages, Hayes." "Stop her," Sterling roared over the net. "She's not missing, Chief. I don't know how, but she's not missing." Abigail's vision tunneled. Her right eye was locked on the crosshairs, her left eye squeezed shut against the stinging grit. Blood began to trickle from her nose, a consequence of the concussive pressure waves from the massive muzzle brake firing repeatedly in rapid succession. Crack. Target 7. Adjust half-mil right. The haboob is intensifying. Crack. Target 8. Targets. 1 hostile left. The man on the far left flank. By now the first bullets were arriving in the courtyard in a deadly, staggered rhythm. In the span of a few seconds, 7 men were dropping to the sand, their skulls and chest cavities shattered by .08 rounds falling from the sky like the wrath of God. The last mercenary would be panicking. He would be stepping back, predictive movement. 2 feet back, 1 foot left. Abigail shifted her rifle. She didn't aim where he was. She aimed where his fear would take him. Crack. Target 9. They're mine. The magazine clicked empty. The chamber stayed open. Abigail Trent slumped forward over the rifle, gasping for air, her cheek resting against the burning hot metal of the receiver. The wind howled over the ridge, covering them in a fine layer of beige powder. "Ceasefire, ceasefire," Sterling was yelling on the radio. "Trent, report. What the hell did you just do?" Abigail pressed the transmit button on her comms. Her voice was weak, shaking slightly from the sudden adrenaline dump. "Overwatch is clear, Alpha 1. 9 targets engaged. Check the courtyard. You shot blind into a haboob, Trent. You're facing a court-martial if there's a scratch on those doctors. Just check the courtyard, Chief, she whispered, letting her head fall fully onto her arms. The haboob raged for another grueling 20 minutes before the wind shear broke and the storm began to dissipate, rolling south toward the borders of the Sahel. The blinding wall of brown faded into a hazy, choking fog of suspended dust. The desert sun bled through, casting an eerie, rust-colored light over the valley. In the dry wash, Chief Sterling coughed up a mouthful of grit and racked the charging handle of his HK-4 Henstin assault rifle. Beside him, Petty Officer Chris Campbell wiped the dust from his night vision goggles, realizing they were useless in the daylight haze. "Alpha Squad, we move," Sterling ordered, his tone deadly and grim. "We breach now. Prepare for mass casualties. If Trent hit those doctors, secure her weapon and place her under arrest immediately upon extraction." "Copy," the men muttered. The squad moved in a tight tactical diamond, boots crunching softly on the shale as they crested the lip of the wash and approached the rear wall of the compound. The steel door to the courtyard had been blown off its hinges by the wind. Sterling signaled with a closed fist. The team stacked up. "Breaching," Sterling whispered. He swung around the door frame, rifle raised, laser sight cutting through the settling dust. He froze. Campbell bumped into his shoulder, raising his own weapon. "Contact." "Hold," Sterling breathed, lowering his rifle by an inch. The courtyard was silent, save for the soft weeping of a woman near the far wall. The 9 hostages were still there, kneeling in the exact same positions they had been in before the storm hit. They were covered in a thick layer of sand, looking like terracotta statues. But they were alive. Scattered around them, half buried in the shifting dunes the haboob had deposited, were the bodies of 9 heavily armed mercenaries. Sterling stepped cautiously into the courtyard. He approached the first body. It was the man in the center, the man smoking the cigar. A massive crater had been punched straight through his chest plate. Dead before he hit the ground. Sterling moved to the next body. Headshot. The next. Well, center mass. He walked the entire semicircle. 9 bodies, 9 shots. In the span of roughly 20 seconds, firing blindly through a wall of moving sand from a distance of over 10,000 feet, Abigail Trent had threaded a needle through a hurricane. Dr. Aris Thorne, the lead surgeon of the captive NGO group, looked up at Sterling through bloodshot eyes. He was trembling violently. They just started dropping. The wind was so loud, but the sand kept hitting us with this wet spray. They just fell over. We thought it was magic. We thought it was God." Sterling stared at the shattered remains of a mercenary's radio. He slowly raised his hand to his earpiece. "Overwatch, this is Alpha 1, Sterling said. His voice, usually a booming gravel of authority, was quiet, almost reverent. "Alpha 1, this is Overwatch," Hayes replied. "Go ahead." "Status of hostages?" Hayes asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Sterling looked at the 9 terrified living doctors, and then down at the 9 dead hostiles. "Hostages are secure. 0 casualties. I repeat, 0 hostage casualties. 9 hostiles KIA. A long pause hung on the radio, then a sharp exhale of breath from Hayes. "Copy that, Alpha 1. Trent," Sterling said. "I'm here, Chief." Abigail's small, exhausted voice crackled in his ear. "There's something wrong down here," Sterling said, walking back to the center of the courtyard. He kicked the boot of the man with the cigar. "This guy, the one we fought, was Kale. He's wearing Kale's gear, but the face doesn't match the intel packet. It's a decoy. The real Kale isn't here." "I know," Abigail replied. Sterling stopped. "Say again." Up on the ridge, Abigail sat up, slowly rolling her aching shoulder. When Hayes spotted them before the storm, I spent 60 seconds observing their body language through the optic. The man with the cigar was posturing. Too stiff, but the man on the far left flank, target number 9, he was the one the others kept glancing at for non-verbal cues. He wasn't holding a rifle. He was holding a dead man's switch detonator wired to the compound gates. He was the real Victor Kale. Sterling walked over to the body on the far left. He knelt in the sand. The dead man's face matched the high-value target profile perfectly. and clasped in his cold, dead hand was a sophisticated radio frequency detonator, the thumb trigger unpressed. If Abigail had shot the cigar-smoking decoy first, the real Cale would have depressed the switch, blowing the gates and the hostages to hell. She had not only calculated the physics of a 350-meter shot through a haboob, she had completely decoded the enemy's psychological command structure in 60 seconds. And she had killed Cale last, predicting his exact movement as his men fell around him, ensuring he died before his thumb could twitch. Sterling slowly stood up. He looked out over the vast, empty expanse of the desert, toward the jagged spine of rock 2 miles away, completely obscured by the heat haze and distance. "Command, this is Alpha 1, Sterling said into his radio. "Jackpot. Primary target Victor Cale is KIA. Hostages are secure, requesting immediate exfil. Copy, Alpha 1. Blackhawk is inbound." "Outstanding work, Chief." Sterling let go of the transmit button. "It wasn't me, Command," he muttered to himself. He switched over to the squad's encrypted tactical net. "Overwatch, pack it up and move to extraction point Bravo," Sterling ordered. "Copy, Alpha 1, Hayes said. "And Hayes?" "Yeah, Chief." Sterling looked down at the dead man's switch. "Carry her rifle for her if she needs it." "She's earned it." "On the ridge," Hayes grinned, looking over at Abigail. She was already field-stripping the bipod of her Shatak, her pale face smeared with dirt and dried blood from her nose. "You hear that, Abby?" Hayes chuckled. "Chief's getting soft." Abigail slung the 31-pound rifle over her back. The weight nearly drove her to her knees, but she locked her legs, stood straight, and looked out over the valley. The wind blew a strand of blonde hair across her eyes. "I carry my own weapon, Hayes," she said softly. "Math doesn't need help." When they finally regrouped at the extraction zone, the massive rotors of the MH-60 Blackhawk helicopter whipping the remaining desert sand into a frenzy. Alpha Squad stood waiting. As Abigail and Hayes approached, the giant men of the SEAL team parted, clearing a path for the 4'9" operator. No one called her the doll anymore. They didn't say a word. They just watched in silent awe as she walked past them, her boots heavy, her rifle strapped to her back. Stepping onto the ramp of the helicopter, Chief Sterling stood by the door. As Abigail passed him, he didn't give her a sarcastic salute or a patronizing pat on the back. He simply stepped aside, looked her dead in the eyes, and gave a sharp, definitive nod of absolute respect. A doll couldn't fight, but a mathematician with a 31-pound sniper rifle didn't need to fight. She just needed to solve the equation. And out here, in the unforgiving sandbox, Abigail Trent had proven that death was just a matter of physics. If this gripping, true-to-life military story had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on incredible tales of tactical genius and battlefield heroism. Share this video with your friends to show them what true precision looks like.